Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul,
and Jolene,
and today we're talking about the bait and switch game.
which is a really bad idea, just so you know.
Well, okay, so little background on me. I've been playing games for a long time, but it wasn't until I started running games at GameCons, played and ran games there, I developed different skills and different ways of running games and different ideas. Because, when you run with your group and you only run with your group, especially for us, when we were running since we were in junior high, everybody's used to each other and stuff like that. And they kind of, sometimes people fit in the same role over and over again. I'm going to call out my friend Mike, who always played the scoundrel, grifter, no matter what kind of character. He even made a wholesome druid, shepherd of the forest, into this grifter guy who was out there.
That was when he was a teenager, though, right?
He was a teenager, but it seems like that we fall into roles. But when I was started to run games like around 1995 at con games at different conventions here in the San Francisco Bay Area, players threw me for loops all the time because I wasn't used to their style of play, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool what that person did. And another thing is that I couldn't really predict how they would react to things, where I could with my friends. If I presented friends with a situation, I more or less knew how they were going to react and what they were going to do. But strangers, you don't know. So that's where I'm coming from. So I've been running games for a long time, and I never really thought about the bait and switch kind of game. I didn't even know what they were really. And I remember I had this idea for a World War II game where I was going to insert the supernatural like halfway through the game. Like it was just going to be a straight World War II. A few weeks after D-Day, the characters are tromping through France. I had this fascination with Dijon, France, because I hate mustard. But Dijon...
You're such a dork.
But Dijon, France is an interesting location, and that's where I was going to set my game. And I was thinking like Kelly's Heroes type of game where the characters they're kind of on their own. They're being led by some officer who's maybe, what is he? He's crafty, and he's like a Mike character, right? He's out for his own benefit. And if you ever seen the movie Kelly's Heroes, they come across a bank that has a bunch of gold that's been stolen by the Germans, and there's a tank there and all this stuff. So I was going to, insert that kind of game. That was the kind of game I was going for. And then I was going to insert a little bit of weird, a little supernatural. And I worked on it, and and then I asked a few friends of mine who were GMs at cons, and they ran a lot of con games, and they're like, "Oh, that's a bait and switch, dude. Probably shouldn't do that." I'm like, "What's that?" He goes, "Where you present one game and then you give them something else." I'm like, "Really?" He goes, "Oh yeah." He goes, "They were telling me, a couple of them, that's a bad idea." I'm like, "Really?" I just never thought about that people would be upset. So I tabled that game. I came up with that game about 15 years ago. Our son was pretty young. So a bait and switch is when you present something, and then when you present a game, and then you don't follow with what that presentation was. And there's different illustrations or different examples of it. I was thinking of just like what I was saying. I'm going to start a World War II game. I'm not going to tell them about the supernatural. They're just going to be regular soldiers, and then they come across weird out in the field, the battlefield kind of thing. But Jolene's across from something a little bit stranger.
Well, from that example, I would say that in your description, you should at least put you would have to say something about weird war, right? And I wouldn't understand why you wouldn't just say, "I'm going to run a weird war game," and then they would know that there was going to be supernatural in it.
And I just wanted to surprise them with the supernatural. That was the whole point. That was my thinking.
When we ran our big game with 3 tables and 3 different genres,
yes.
We had that issue in trying to figure out what to put in the program for DunDraCon when we did it, because we didn't want to lie to the people. And we talked about that. We didn't want it to be a bait and switch.
Right.
Because you had already figured out that. And in our description, we made it clear that it wasn't going to be straightforward, right? That you would have to save the world, and you may have to do different things to do it.
Yeah, I don't know if we were exactly clear on what our intention was, because we did want to sort of surprise people. So I thought that's what I was going for. And so when I wrote the description, I literally said that people would influence what was going on in the other tables.
Yes.
But I didn't specifically say we're going to move people from one table to another. I'll put it in the show notes. We actually talked about this big game that we ran at DunDraCon a few years ago with 3 tables of 6 players each, ran by 3 different GMs. And Jolene was the GM wrangler who coordinated everything to make sure that we were all on task. And
never do again.
I actually thought it went off really well.
It did, and most people really, really liked it. There were these 3 people that came in at the beginning going, I only want to play at the D&D table.
Yeah, that was one guy, I think, and the other 2 people were along with the ride for him. One was his wife, and one was his best friend. And so they all sat down at the D&D table, you're right. And then they were kind of mad because...
he was mad.
Right.
His wife was perfectly fine moving, and she had a blast.
That's what's just funny because... So they were in the D&D group. Her and his best friend got moved to my table, and he got stuck by himself at the D&D table. And all that is explained in the episode where we talk about the big game, the big D&D game. And I'll put the show notes if you want to listen to that, and so it describes everything we did. So what I wanted to do is kind of surprise the players a little bit. And what we did was we added 3 times at one point. We moved 2 players, and we rotated 2 players from table to table to table. And I thought it was a great idea. I think most people loved it. They were like, wow, this is pretty cool. Because it was kind of like interdimensional. Because all 3 tables were facing the same bad guy, but in 3 realities or whatever. And we were going to make the whole reality converge and blow everything apart and disintegrate the universes and the multiverse. And I thought it was an interesting idea. I thought it was really fun. I was vague about what was going to happen in the game because I wanted that to be kind of a surprise. And we had my friend got a gong. So we call it the gong of doom or something like that, the 3 rings of doom. And so we would actually hit the gong, and that's when we would all switch. So players.
And most of the players really liked it afterwards. They told us how much they enjoyed it. And the best line that I heard during the game was one of the sorcerers from the D&D realm came to a supernatural game. And literally when she threw a fireball, was it a fireball? It was a fireball.
Yeah, it was a fireball.
And the people at the table, one of the guy goes, "Do we really see a fireball come out of her hand?" And Saul goes, "Yes." And the guy goes, "Cool."
Yeah, that was really neat. Like I said, I don't really want to talk about that game too much.
I know.
Described it, but it was funny because what happened was they had a witch, and that's what I called her in that game because she was a sorceress, but we just called her witch. So she would always, the person playing it was a woman, and she was always talking about weird stuff, right? Like a modern witch would. So the modern witch, the modern sorceress, at my table never threw a spell. She talked about herbs and she had potions that made you feel better. And so everybody thought she was just a crazy lady in the game. Was probably some other type of character because they were all playing modern characters. The cleric was actually like a priest.
A medic,
right? Medic or a priest. I forget what he was. But nobody believed that she could actually throw spells. So when their sorcerers got taken to the future, I believe is the direction she went, and they got this medieval woman with robes and stuff and all kinds of strange, accoutrements to her wardrobe. They're like, whoa, right? They were like, and so at one point they get in trouble and she throws a fireball, and that's exactly what happened. And then the whole table looks at me, and this one guy goes, "Did we actually see a fireball come out of her head?" I go, "Yeah." She's like, "What do you say?"
Cool.
which I didn't even think about how it wasn't even a given that she was really both of them were actually real sorcerers, but the other one never threw a spell and
well, because in modern day, witches don't throw fireballs, right?
Yeah, right?
Not where everybody can see them.
And they were exactly the same build. I think we gave them the same spells and stuff. Anyway, it wasn't. I don't consider that a real classic bait and switch. That other one you mentioned before. Did you mention it already?
No. But I think the example that we're using here is just that you could see some people had a really good time with it, and some people didn't like the idea. So I would be really careful doing that. And I would never run that game again because it was just insane to try to wrangle the GMs into doing what they were supposed to. And then I think we broke Steve because he doesn't want to GM anymore at the conventions because of that.
Yeah, we did talk about that last time too. So that episode, I looked it up, and it's episode 7, way back, number 7 of our podcast. So we'll go all the way to almost the beginning, and episode 7 is the big D&D game at DunDraCon. I really liked how it went. I think for the first try, we didn't play test it because we couldn't play test it with 18 people. I mean, I guess I could have wrangled 18 friends of mine, but I don't know. But it was like the first time we did it. It was kind of crazy. We tried to use those drapes that our friend had painted for a little bit of a separation between the tables. I was hoping to get a little bit of sound separation, but it didn't work. But I also didn't want the tables to be totally separated because I wanted the people to be able to hear kind of what was going on at the other table. And then they're kind of having this, maybe they would get the glimpse of what was going on the other table, and it would be similar to what was going on at my table. But it was just too loud to be able to discern little elements of sound or bites of sound here and there. So so it was a very big learning process, and I thought a lot of people liked it. There was only, like I said, what we talked about, those 3 people that supposedly didn't like it, and it really was only the husband, his friend, and his wife were like, when they were at my table, they were like super happy, they were playing, and then they were just having a good time. But I could see that if he wanted to play with his friend, that he didn't like.
Well, and then
he only wanted to play D&D.
There was the people that had gone to the future, and they felt a little bit uncertain that they couldn't run the ship, right?
Right.
And then one of the other players goes, "All we do is tell the ship what we want it to do, and it does it." And as soon as that player said that, those characters just came to life, right? And they were like, "Oh, that's what you do," and then they were like, "Oh, okay, I can do that."
Yeah, because I think they came from my timeline,
the
modern timeline. So when they went to the future or the futuristic sci-fi one, they're like, "Oh, I don't know how to do things." And this one guy, and it was a friend of ours. It was I forget his name, but it was one of Jonah's friends, and he goes, "We don't know what we're taught to do things either. We just tell the computer and it does it." And then they're like, "Really?" They're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, okay." After that was no problem.
Yeah. So that's it. That's interesting. But when I looked it up online, most of the bait and switch kind of games, I wouldn't suggest it. This one guy suggested that he didn't want to play D&D, but he wanted to put it out as a D&D game and then have people, after the first session, he was going to say, "I don't want to play D&D. I don't want to run D&D. I want to run this. So if you come back next time, this is what I'm going to run." And he thought that would be a good idea. And from the comment section, people thought that was a very bad idea.
Because we B-rated, we cannot say some of the things that people said. And Jolie was telling me about that. I'm like, oh my God. So that is, I haven't thought about, because seriously, I have thought about that bait and switch. But one, it's pretty sneaky. And a lot of times when, I don't know, that's pretty bad. Because like if you're inviting people for a D&D game, people are expecting a D&D game. Now, I never thought about, "Oh, you guys are here for D&D, but I'm going to run Twilight 2000. And like, we already told you we don't like Twilight 2000. Or something like that. So our D&D game was a slight trespass on the bait and switch. That was totally bait and switch, right? When you want to run a game that's completely different than the one you say you're going to run. And another thing I was thinking, I never even thought of that. I was thinking more like just adventures where you present something as an adventure as being like, I don't know, an investigative game, and it becomes like an action game. Now, I don't know how that would happen, what kind of things would have to change for the game to go that way. But sometimes games change the way just because different players are playing it. Like I've ran the same adventure a few times of different kinds of games that I run. And because the players are different, the game is different, right? For example, I ran a Tecmo game, Empire of the Pearl Throne, using Bethorm, the rules by Jeff D, and I ran it like 5 different times, the same adventure, and I didn't change a thing, nothing. And it was like 5 different games. And some of them were pretty similar. I gotta admit. But other ones, like this one game, it was like they wanted to answer. They wanted to answer all the questions that they had. So it was very investigative heavy. They're like, "Why is this happening? What's going on?" and stuff like that. Where there was another group that was like very task orientated, right? So I've talked about it before. The adventure was taking a prisoner from one city to another. If you don't know what Tecumseh or Empire of Pale Throne is, it's a far future game, but it actually has descended into like medieval world. So on another planet, it's very dangerous. So going from one city to another is very dangerous, but there's these big roads called the Sakbi roads that are like they're kind of like similar to the Great Wall of China, and that's how they've traveled from one place to another. Because even the countryside is really dangerous, even though it's not under control of the army. So there's one group. There was all kinds of weird stuff happening along the road, and they didn't care. It was like we're going to the other city. All that weird stuff. It's interesting, but we're just gonna keep going. And so like they just like made a beeline for the city, and the other people were like, well, "Why is that happening?" And like, let's go figure it out. And so that was a change in the game, but that had nothing to do with me. It had to do with the players.
You weren't baiting and switching
Right.
anything. That was just different players,
But
different outcomes.
Intentionally said, well, this is just a combat game, and it becomes an investigative game, or is an investigative game. I'm not sure if that's a bait and switch, but I think the problem is if you present something as something and then don't deliver that something.
I also was reading that this one guy says that this has been happening to him, bait and switch games, since AD&D. And he's not talking about like they present one thing and do another. He's talking about how you roll up your characters, you're planning on playing something, and then the GM does something like a swirly thing is there, and you're transported to the other side of Forgotten Realms or whatever, right? Although I don't think Forgotten Realms existed during AD&D, but
I think it did.
Okay, then there you go. Or all of a sudden you're transported, you go to sleep in your camp, and it's kind of foggy, and you wake up in Ravenloft or things like that.
That's the way that game's supposed to play, though. The from the very beginning.
But he's talking about how he thinks that that's a little bit of bait and switch, that you're planning on doing one thing, but you're doing another. But that's D&D, right? Because you never know what's gonna.
Well, if you're playing the magical world, you never know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
That whole Ravenloft, I think that's officially how you get transported to Bavaria or something like that. The world that
the Ravenloft world
is in. It is you get transported there. I think one is through that way where you're in camp and it gets all foggy and you wake up and you're in this world of Transylvania, kind of with vampire, or you don't know it's a vampire, but you're in Ravenloft land. And then there is I think the new one is like you're going through the forest again with fog. I'll never trust fog. Never trust fog. And you magically wander into the world of Ravenloft. And that's, I don't know. The thing is that when people start running, unless you don't tell the players you're running Ravenloft and that happens, that could be considered a bait and switch because that totally changes the vibe of the world. Well, I don't know, depending on how you run your D&D game. My D&D is pretty straightforward, and I usually run in Forgotten Realms. That's where, I've thought about making my own world, but what the hell, we use Forgotten Realms. My games are high adventure, just the way that usually D&D is set up. And my players, if I didn't tell them we were going to go into Ravenloft, and they go into Ravenloft. Now, a couple of players would really love that, like Ian would love Ravenloft. But other players, like maybe you or maybe Kathy, because it's kind of like a miserable world or land where this vampire is in charge of things, so things can't be too good for humans. So everybody's like depressed, misery and stuff, and I'm not sure a lot of people would like that. Some of my players would like that, but what are you going to do?
Kill everything and get out.
Well, that's the thing. How do you get out of that world? Because you don't even know how you got there. I think the only way to get out of it is to go after...
the vampire?
Yeah. I forget what his name is.
Well, then that's what we would do, and then we'd probably die, but there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
So the only thing I can think about for bait and switch is if you have created the characters for something and then you're sending them to something else, that kind of takes away player agency, right? Because the player doesn't necessarily want to go there.
Right. I think what happens is that if somebody expects a certain kind of game and you present something totally different, you run the risk of upsetting somebody, right? And I'm like, I don't want to play that game, or even that type of game.
Right.
And so if you don't tell people things, I don't know. I think it could just, like my friends who told me, admonished me, don't run a bait and switch game. It seems kind of bait and switch to me. Even though my World War II game that would turn a little bit weird or turn weird, I don't think that was too big of a transgression, because ultimately this only happens in one shots and con games, which are basically one shots. This bait and switch where it's a problem like that, where you present one game and kind of insert something a little bit different. For example, if I was running, I don't know, like I was running this World War II game and I added something weird, then some people who are like, oh, I don't want to play in a realistic World War II game. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. But I think most people might roll with that. It's a little bit easier. I think it's possible. I think it wasn't so bad. Our big D&D game, okay. We kind of bent that rule, don't use a bait and switch. But I think it worked out pretty good. Now, changing the whole game, now that's the real bait and switch where you say, I'm going to play D&D, and I'll bring out Space Opera. We're going to play that instead. I think that might really upset people. That's a real bait and switch. Also, if you present like an adventure and then that's not the adventure you run. Like if it's an adventure, some people, or maybe a published adventure, like Ravenloft, you say, oh, we're going to play in Forgotten Realms, and then everybody makes a character, and then everybody goes to sleep at camp, and they wake up in Ravenloft. And they're like, oh, wow, we're going to play in Ravenloft. Though I think Ravenloft is originally set in Forgotten Realms, but it's like in an alternate reality kind of thing. So it's not really part of Forgotten Realms. Like if you open up Forgotten Realms map, there's no Bulgaria, whatever that place that Ravenloft takes place in. It's not on the map anywhere. You read about this one person who put out that inclusive game.
Yeah, I read about this guy, and I think it was England, who put out a game that said it was it was supposed to be a very friendly game for women and other individuals that felt uncomfortable playing games. And then, so these women went to the game, and
was that a convention?
It was at a convention. Oh, yeah. And it turned out that it turned into this misogynistic kind of game. And the lady's like, well, we had already signed up for it. We didn't want to leave it. And I'm thinking,
yeah,
I would have just walked away. I might have actually not just walked away. I might have said something and then walked away.
Yeah, you're getting shite. So that's really nasty. I would definitely, that's terrible, no matter what. That's like somebody who is just a terrible GM, right? The whole idea that they invite people to be inclusive, and then they do exactly what people don't want to happen.
And I think the guy was like trying to make a point about something. I don't know what the point was.
Yeah, well,
because
the point.
That's why when I read that, I was like, that's pretty bad.
That's pretty bad individual. And that's, I don't even know what to call that. That's, what is that? Not being truthful or straightforward? I don't know what better word for that is.
I don't really think that's a bait and switch game. I think that's more of a really bad GM game, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody who's trying to cause pain to people, or
yeah, that's just terrible. I don't know. I don't think I've ever been in a bad game like that, or where somebody is just vile. I mean, that's just the best word for that situation. But we're not talking about something like that who seemingly that guy just wants to inflict people, right? Oh, I need victims for my game, and these are people I want to punish. So I'm going to say that they're safe in my group.
Yeah.
It's like telling.
I think he was going against the whole PC thing, the idea of 0 sessions, people, they usually have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Then. And
yeah, the game
and X cards and
yeah, I guess,
and things like
you
that.
Just prove the point that you need one,
right?
Or you shouldn't be GMing because you're a piece of crap. That's pretty bad. Again, I think bait and switches are really for me is a con game. That situation, because in a home game where you're gonna play a long campaign, the session 0 would totally X out this bait and switch problem.
And if it didn't, then your friends would would give you an earful and tell you exactly what they think.
Especially if you have a session 0 and it's all about, figuring out where we're comfortable going, what kind of game we want to play, and then you change it all up just because, you want to run a different type of game. That's pretty bad bait and switch, and you might upset people, which is the whole point of why we even did this, is that I wouldn't want to run a game that upset anybody, right? For whatever reason. And I think we try, because we're supposed to be having fun. And I am not the type of person or GM that thinks that being upsetting people is fun.
No.
There's some jerks out there that's what they like to do, but that's not me, and hopefully that's not anybody that listens to this podcast. But usually, I was thinking more, simple bait and switch, where you kind of present it one way and you kind of like insert the weird or change something. And I think that's doable. I think that can happen in a game, in a one shot with your friends, because hopefully you know your friends and you know what they like, you know what they don't like, if they have any things that are taboo or whatever. But even longtime friends, you might not know exactly what they've been through sometimes, and they may not, you may not know that
they don't like something.
Or they grown not to like it, because, like, let's say they were never married, and they have a long-term partner, they didn't fall in love, and they go, you know what? I don't want women being mistreated or be put in danger. That might be an issue for somebody that never had that issue before. So I think you should be careful with stuff like that. But I think if you know your friends and you have a one shot and it's a one shot and it's not gonna inflict too much mental stress on their friends. I was being facetious there, but if you think that it's not gonna be a problem for that group, then you could do something like what I'm talking about. Now, playing a totally different game, that might upset people no matter what.
I would just like to say that when you go to a convention, the blurbs about the games, it's often hard to tell exactly what the game is going to be. I'm just saying, because I've read some of the descriptions and gone, I don't know what that means. Or then they put in there, this is a homebrew game, and then you're like, okay, I don't know what that means. So because I don't know what their homebrew rules are, right?
Right. Well, homebrew usually means that it's something they came up with.
It's changed. Well, or
it's their own.
Well, a lot of those descriptions say D&D 5th edition homebrew.
Oh yeah.
And then you're like going, I don't know what that means.
Homebrew how much is their D&D still in this game?
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't consider that bait and switch. I just consider that there's not enough space in the program to explain exactly what the game is going to be.
We are here in Northern California. They give you a little booklet. Terrible.
They're working on going to digital, but they haven't. It hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, because environmentalists. There's all those paper that you're throwing away. I understand that quandary. So because they print it, there's a lot of different conventions. They limit how much you can say about the game that you're going to run.
Especially a convention like DunDraCon, because there's 3,500 games or something.
No, I don't know about that, but they do have quite a few role playing games for the size of the convention that it is. They have usually over 300 role playing games, I think.
Oh,
maybe it's even more role playing games. That's not
including everything else.
And it was a good thing the pretty cool thing about DunDraCon is that you get your own individual room. We talked about that. So when you write your blurb, they limit it to I don't know how many characters, right? And it's like a tweet. Sometimes I'll write something out or would describing my game, and I always have to chop it down, right?
Well, you're kind of verbose in that way.
But what happens is that you're chopping down words that aren't necessary. Then when you chop out all that crap, you're still over. Man,
it's hard to give a
succinct description. Yeah, and I think that would be a problem if you have a real complicated type of game. To try to just complicated as far as hard to describe, but you don't want to leave that crucial information that this is kind of like crucial information that this is different than just a D&D game. If you're gonna
you want to tell people, because then some people are okay with that. Some people are going, no, I want to play D&D 5th edition. I don't want a homebrew.
Right.
I don't want to be transported to Mars. A different.
That would be cool. I mean, I as a player, I am happy to be surprised as long as they don't I don't know. I haven't
come out of the blue.
Yeah, but even then, I just don't. I don't know. I just don't. I've never played in a game I never really didn't like. I like being pleasantly surprised. That's the problem, is how do you know you're going to pleasantly surprise people? I think the blurb really helps. I think when we described the D&D game, I said something about where players will impact other tables and can impact other tables, and I don't think that was clear enough, that saying that players were going to interact with different
Time
tables.
or different.
Right. I think if I would have put that in, I wouldn't have felt as bad to that guy who was upset that we moved his friend and his wife away from him. But then again, he was kind of a jerk, so I didn't really care about how upset he was. And then his friend and his wife had a grand old time. So he was the only one that was a little bit upset about it. I think he still had a good time. He stayed at the D&D table, I think.
Yeah, he did stay at the D&D table.
There was, the way we worked the game, 2 people out of each table would stay. Was that right?
No, everybody moved.
Everybody moved. Yeah.
So he must have moved.
He must have moved, but he didn't seem to complain about it too much. In fact, we were talking about that game. We actually, people really liked it. They thanked us for running it. We did run a little bit over. They were happy to stay. I don't think anybody left.
No,
I don't think anybody left. And we were very tired by the end of that game. Bait and switch, I don't think it's something you should use as a GM, and I try to be as forthright as possible.
Forthright.
Isn't that what I said?
You said forthright.
Well, okay. It's 6:00 in the morning. What can I do? Anyways, I think it's probably, as my friends who admonished me not to do it because somebody might be upset, I think it's better safe than sorry. Don't use bait and switch of any kind, even the
slight ones.
Add a little bit of weirdness to my World War II game, which I present as a standard, straight up realistic World War II game, but add weirdness. Just mention it. And
in your blurb say weirdness may approach you or something.
What I would do in that game now that I've had many years of thinking about it, I've thought about this game for about 17 years, is that I would say, talk about D-Day and war is hell kind of thing. And then I would say at the very end, the regular soldier fighting the regular war, and then things go a little strange. And then that's all I would do. I'll be very vague, but definitely mention that things are going to get weird. And then how I would run it would be, I would be running the game, nothing weird, and I'm sure they're going to be looking around every corner waiting for whatever to come by, and nothing's happening. And then maybe about halfway through the game,
what was that you saw out of the corner of your eye?
Or it just, the local villager you come across talks about, like I was telling you, I think I mentioned some other game lately where little Peter says that his brother grew hair and went out the window in the middle of the night, and they're like, well, okay, we'll just keep going. But little Peter will ask you for help. And then somebody's gone missing in the village. What do you do as a soldier? And that was exactly what I was thinking about putting in my game and stuff like that. So anyway, I think it's something you should use with great caution.
Or not use at all.
And not use at all.
There you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
You have a good day.